Hello everyone, this is Corsair Mac, one of your 4 wellness professionals at Elgin Community College, and I am here to talk to you about test anxiety. Now with midterms right around the corner, or pretty much upon us already, this is a very important topic to cover so that way us here at Wellness Services can give you tips, tricks, and hopefully some way of helping you combat your test anxiety if you do have it, as well as do well on your tests. So what we're going to go over this video is essentially what is test anxiety, what are the symptoms of test anxiety, and what are some tips, tricks, and coping skills to help you stay calm, cool, and collected, as well as pass your tests. So sit back, relax, grab a warm cup of cocoa or whatever warm drink you want because it is snowing outside, and listen to me talk to you and hopefully help you out with your test anxiety. All right, so now let's talk about the definition of test anxiety. So test anxiety is a physical, emotional, or mental negative response before taking a test or during taking a test, which can affect test performance. The reason for some of those negative responses are 1, fear of failure, right? We're studying, we know we need to pass, but we're just not sure that we are going to pass. 2, being a perfectionist, right? So you want to make sure everything's perfect, right? You want to make sure that you know everything. You want to make sure that no matter what, the answers will come to you just like that. Another one could be stress or pressure. So maybe taking this test might be the last test you need to get that passing grade, or even pressure from home. I need to do well on all these tests to make sure I get into an even better school, so that way I can make enough money to support not only myself, but my family, right? And there are others that go along with it as well, but ultimately it all results in affecting your test taking. And even with some of those emotional things that we talked about, right? That could be a lot of worrying, feeling hopeless or worthless, or even saying, what's the point of taking this if I'm going to fail because I have too much writing on this, right, which would cause my anxiety to go up. And now we're going to get into symptoms that go along with test anxiety. All right, so next let's go over some symptoms of test anxiety. So test anxiety is basically a mixture of generalized anxiety disorder with panic disorder. So some general symptoms include shortness of breath, excessive sweating, difficulty concentrating, and normally that would lead into a panic. So basically headaches, finding it very hard to breathe, racing heart palpitations, and ultimately you're overthinking, which could cause you to have a panic attack. And like I said, some of the general symptoms can be found before taking the test or during the test, but morely the panic symptoms can be found during taking the test. And then next, what we're going to do, we're going to go over some tips, tricks, and tools to help give you coping skills to help make sure that you can overcome these symptoms and do well on your test. So before we get into coping skills, tips, and tricks to help you with test anxiety, first we gotta go over a little bit of psycho-information about what the main enemy of anxiety is. So ultimately, the main enemy of anxiety is facts, right? What is 100% true? Because when we are in our anxious mindset, we make up a lot of assumptions and opinions 9 times out of 10, or even for the most part 10 times out of 10, those opinions are false. Those assumptions are false. So then we are working ourselves up over something that is not true. So how we work ourselves down is first challenge those assumptions and opinions, see is there any way I can disprove them? And then also working to disprove those assumptions and opinions to help us get rid of our anxiety, as well as using some stress relief or anxiety relieving techniques to help us calm down, because when we're anxious, we're all tense up, right? We're all just really, really tense, right? Which comes from the excessive breathing, hyperventilating, or with the heart rate, because our body is essentially pumping blood really fast because of our heart rate going up. So what our body tries to do is contract itself to try to keep everything intact. So what we need to do is calm ourselves down by slowing ourselves down. And that way, combining with focusing on the facts, we will help control and manage our anxiety. So now, let's get into some coping skills. So before we get into stress relieving, first let's go over some facts about you to help you focus on while taking a test and even studying for a test. First fact, we have to find out what type of learner you are. So, type of learning are first visual, right? We like to see things being done. Auditory, we like to hear someone explain it. Tactile, right? We like to do it. Or essentially reading and memorizing, meaning we like to read things over and over and over and over again until we get it memorized into our brain. What that helps us do is really condense and help us effectively study, right? Because the way we learn helps us see the way we remember as well. So effective studying by figuring out which one of those you are will help you increase the likelihood of retaining information into your brain. Also, with the different learning techniques or the different ways you learn, you can also use that in taking your tests as well. Because ultimately, what we're doing is we're making something that's familiar to your brain to help pull out that information. So let's go over at least one common one for each learning style so that way it can help you out when you're taking your tests. So first, visual. So visual, again, is when you see someone doing something. So how you can use that to help you take a test or even study, right, is by writing down the different steps, right, on how to do things. And this can usually go for any test you do, right? So for example, with math, which is the easiest one, right, you have to follow step-by-step process of doing a problem. And when you see that and it helps you memorize it, then you can write out the step-by-step process, right? And then seeing it, and then again, doing it, right? And also that can work for, let's say, for example, English, because there are certain step-by-step processes of how you have to write papers, right? So you gotta make sure you follow step 1, which is the header, step 2, the opening paragraph, step 3, the different talking points in the body, step 4, explanations of the body, right? Step 5, the conclusion, and step 6, the references, right? And you can use that to also help you out with writing papers. So with each subject, you just have to figure out what that step-by-step process is if you're a visual learner, so that way you can write it out, you can see it being done, and then after that, you can use that to effectively help you retain information as well as to help you effectively take tests as well. Next up is auditory. So how you can use that to effectively study as well as to effectively take tests is one, by reading out loud the steps or reading out loud the information to yourself. And that way it can act like you're hearing it from a teacher, but instead you're hearing it from yourself, right? And do that multiple times over and over again. And again, not reading it, but reading it out loud, right? Because your ears need to hear it. And how you can use that to help you out in the test is, thankfully, now that we're in COVID times, I guess the one positive thing about COVID for auditory learners is that you can read out loud the questions to yourself, right? And what that will do, it'll help trigger the content in your brain to match the question. So that way you'll be able to pull out information related to the question, right? Because you're reading it out loud. Your ears are hearing it. So then that'll trigger that information to pull it out of your brain so that way you can do well on tests. All right, next up is tactile learning. So again, liking to do things with your hands so that way you can work out how to do it. And how that helps you, or what to do first to effectively study, is create your own mock questions or your own mock quizzes or your own mock exams. So that way, muscle memory will essentially kick in and take over because your body knows how to do the problem. And that way, it'll just follow that same process over and over and over again. And then, boom, you're able to figure out how to do it by creating different questions, different scenarios, and different things. So that way, how you do it, no matter what appears on the test, your body will know how to react and how to do it. And how that'll help you out on the exam or the test or the quiz is, again, right, you did a mock quiz or a mock test or a mock exam. So then just treating this like another mock quiz test exam takes pressure off of that exam, because then it'll help you increase your self-esteem and self-confidence to where, boom, I already did multiples of these already. I know what I did right. I know what I did wrong. I fixed what I did wrong so that way I can do it right. So now this next test, quiz, or exam will be no different. And then you'll be able to do it just like in any of your mock exams. And even creating those exams will help you learn more about the concepts of what you're testing yourself over or what you're trying to memorize. And then that'll help give you greater knowledge, wisdom, as well as efficacy over that thing. All right, lastly, for the reading and comprehension, now we get into where you just read things multiple times over and over again until it gets into your long-term memory. So ultimately, this is something that will be mainly up to you, but you have to find out how many times it would take for you to read over and over again first gets to your memory. And also what would help is to, instead of reading pages upon pages upon pages, do what we like to call active reading, and writing down key points in what you read, as well as note cards, right? And what that will do, it'll help you associate the question with an answer, right? And then how that will help you out on the test as well is, again, with the note cards, you have the questions there, or you have the concept there, you just have to write down the answer. So then when you see that question, your brain automatically picks it up, just like that from your active reading, or you're reading multiple times over again, or from the note cards, what the answer is. So that way you can answer more effectively and get it right. And that's how it would help for that one. All right, so some other fun tips and tricks for taking a test and before taking the test, right? First things first, do not overstudy, right? Because if you do that, you're gonna overload and short circuit your brain. And when you do that, you're gonna lose a lot of what you studied instead of retaining what you studied. So a best practice tip for that is study for 30 minutes, right? And then take a 10-minute break, then study for another 30 minutes, then take a 10-minute break, then see what you've retained, right? That way you're giving your brain time to store and retain that information, right? And that'll help you also not overload your brain and retain more information as well. Another thing to do would be to also make sure you get 7 to 9 hours of sleep before you take the test, right? So don't stay up all night cramming for an exam. Make sure you do get that rest, because your brain does need to rest and recharge. Because if your brain's not rested or recharged, it's not going to retain any of the information that you have tried to put in your short-term or even long-term memory. 3, make sure you eat more of a protein-based breakfast or a protein-based meal and not a carb-based meal before you enter the exam, because protein helps give you energy, right? And if you overload on carbs, your body's gonna feel heavy, it's gonna feel tired, and it's gonna feel slow. And when you put in that type of mindset, right, you will be less likely to pass that test. So again, make sure you have a carb-based meal. 4, make sure you stay in contact with your professors, right? If a test is coming up, there's no harm in asking what the test will be about, right? They'll give you the chapters that it'll be over, or even they'll give you concepts to more focus on, so that way you can help solidify as well as maximize your studying efforts. All right, and then lastly, something to always do before a test is to make sure that you're not cramming before the test. Because ultimately what you're trying to do, you're trying to push things into your brain that you will not retain, right? Because ultimately you're going to try to cram before the test, try to get those last minute notes in, try to get in those last minute studying in, but ultimately that's ineffective, because that will not stay in your short-term or even your long-term memory, and it will not help when you're trying to pull it out, because ultimately you haven't given it enough time to be stored in your short-term or your long-term memory. And now let's get into some coping skills for relaxation. So now let's get into some coping skills to help you with your test anxiety. So this first one won't really sound like a coping skill, but it is a really good one nonetheless, is to spread out your studying, right? Because ultimately, instead of studying the day before, even the night before, or the day of, you're giving yourself maximum time to really effectively study. And what that does to your brain is it helps reduce those anxious thoughts or anxious feelings, because your brain isn't saying, oh, I'm putting in all the work and all the effort so close to the exam. No, your brain's like, I'm feeling calm, I'm feeling confident, I'm feeling collected because I've spread out my studying. I gave myself time to study each different point or each different concept. I gave myself time to retain that information, and I gave myself time to see what I didn't retain, so that way I can effectively study more to retain it. And that will help out with any anxious thoughts as well as any depressive thoughts, because ultimately you're getting busy and you're doing something and you are ultimately working towards what you want to work towards. So during the test, right, if you feel yourself getting anxious, right, first things first, we have to ground ourselves, right? And there's a few ways you can do that. So first, what grounding is it takes your mind out of those anxious thought processes, those anxious assumptions and those anxious opinions, and it brings it back down to earth, right? So instead of focusing on whatever's going on up here, you're focusing on what's going on around you, right? That also gets into mindfulness. So one thing that people do is they take their pen or pencil and they tap it on their hand, right? And what that does, it helps focus your attention off of those thoughts in your brain, and it helps focus your attention on that pencil as well as that sensation on your hand to help bring you back to reality. Some people like to count backwards from 10 to 1, and what that does is, again, it takes their attention off of those thoughts and puts the attention on the numbers that you're counting, right? People like to deep breathe a lot because, like I mentioned, when we're anxious, we tighten up. And what deep breathing does, it helps us loosen up, right? So that way we won't feel like we're hyperventilating, so that way we won't get any headaches, so that way we won't get any chest pains, right? That way we won't get any stomach pains, we'll be less irritable, right? And ultimately, again, we focus on our breathing to help get us out of up here with those assumptions and opinions and back to reality, right? And then the calmer we are, the more likely we'll be able to remember the information that we retain. And when we remember the information that we retain, it heightens the likeliness of you passing your quiz, test, or exam. And also, lastly, what I recommend people do as well is having a pre-test or pre-exam or pre-quiz routine, right? And what that does, it helps get your body ready to take that quiz, test, or exam. And it helps lower your anxiety because then you know that, okay, I've done my routine, now I'm more confident in myself, now I have more self-esteem, so now I know that I will be more likely to pass that exam, right? So for example, my routine was, wake up at 6 or 7 in the morning, take a shower, eat breakfast, brush my teeth, and then take a walk, right? Just take a walk, not really even thinking about the exam. And then after that, I will start reciting things that I can remember that I studied, so that way I know and I made sure that, okay, I got that down packed, or I got that retained. And if it's something I didn't retain, I'll go look it up real quick, so that way it can help jog my memory. Again, I'm not cramming, I'm just jogging my memory, right? And again, no, I'm not studying before, I'm just jogging my memory, so that way the memory's loose up there, so that way it's more easier to pull down, and that way I'll be more likely to pass the exam. So hopefully those coping skills, tips, and tricks will help you with your test anxiety. All right, so if you made it to this part of the video, then you've made it to the end. And true, there are a lot more tips, tricks, as well as coping skills to help with test anxiety, but then this video will probably be longer than an hour. But ultimately what this process is to help figure out what works for you, right? Because ultimately if we find out what works for you, then you can only focus on what works, right? And then as you implement these tips, tricks, as well as coping skills, you will find out what works for you. And you're going to even discover some things that I did not mention that works for you as well, right? Because everybody's different, everybody learns differently, everybody retains information differently. So ultimately, this is what you need to do to pass, but this is okay, here's some things to try, see if it works for you. If not, find out what didn't work for you to adjust, so that way you can learn new things that will work for you to help you succeed. Though ultimately, like I mentioned, this is the end of the video. Thank you very much for listening to me. All right, so if you are interested in getting more help with test anxiety or anything else mental health, substance use, or wellness related, you can always schedule an appointment with Wellness Services by calling 847-214-7390 and leaving a message, or you can email us at studentwellness@elgin.edu. Also, you can utilize our tutoring services at ECC. They do tutoring over online or over the phone by either calling 847-214-7256, right, or contacting tutoring@elgin.edu to get more information or set an appointment. So that's it for me. Thank you very much, everyone. My name is Corsair Mac. I am one of your ECC Wellness professionals, and I am signing out. Take care, have a blessed day, and stay warm out there.